Hi there, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Nicholas, are we all set to proceed?
So I'm still waiting for the majority of folks to come in here. David, perhaps another minute
Perfect.
just to let folks in. Yeah.
All right, Nicholas, in the interest of time, should we get rolling?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thanks again to everyone joining in today on our webinar, Hydrogen in Canada, Regional Perspectives and National Outlook. My name is David Bilodeau. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Hydrogen Association. For context, the CHA represents nearly 200 companies from across Canada who work throughout and with our association to ensure the continued advancement of hydrogen in Canada and abroad. I'm very pleased to serve as today's moderator. As we all know, 2026 is set to be a really pivotal year for Canada's hydrogen sector. Projects continue to advance, export pathways are taking shape, and governments across the country are advancing policies that will define the sector's long-term competitiveness here at home. At the same time, we're seeing material issues facing the sector and the Canadian economy more broadly. Our goal for this webinar is to kick off 2026 with a coast-to-coast discussion on the trends, priorities, and opportunities that will shape Canada's hydrogen sector in the year ahead. In terms of the run of play, we will spend the next hour or so engaging with our panelists from across Canada to explore key provincial activities and priorities for the year ahead, expected federal and provincial policy developments, market, project, and investment trends to watch, and Canada's positioning in emerging global hydrogen markets. And towards, apologies for that, someone's at the door and the thing's going nuts. And towards the end of the hour, we'll turn to the audience for Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions in the chat or in the questions box on Teams here, and I'll try to address a few questions towards the end of the hour. With that, I'm really thankful to be joined by a number of experts from across the country. Starting on the West Coast, we have Bob Blattler, the EVP of Business Development for Elemental Clean Fuels and the Chair of Hydrogen BC. In Alberta, we have Rebecca Goldsack, the CEO of Diesel Tech Industries and the Chair of Hydrogen Alberta. We have Micah Althaus, the VP of Government Relations and Public Affairs for the Canadian Hydrogen Association, providing perspectives from Ontario. And I'm especially thankful to be joined by our next two guests, Michel Landry, the Executive Director of Hydrogen Quebec, and Derek Estabrook, Executive Director of Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance. And just for context, the CHA, the Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance, and Hydrogen Quebec recently signed MOUs just a few short weeks ago to support continued and greater coordination between our respective organizations. And I think today's discussion is a great first step towards doing so. So with that, I think we're going to start with a few broader questions for our panelists today. And I'll start off on the West Coast and we'll work our way east again. And I'll ask each panelist not only to entertain the questions we'll be putting forward, but also to provide a bit of context on their own organizations to start the conversation. So, Bob, we'll start with you out in BC. In addition to introducing your organization, I'm also hoping you can kind of illuminate us on what are the key drivers and priorities for hydrogen in British Columbia as we kick off 2026, and where do you see the strongest opportunities for growth in the year ahead?
Yeah, that's a full question, David. Thank you very much. So Bob Latler, EVP of Business Development for Elemental Clean Fuels. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to this discussion. I guess from a provincial standpoint and with my responsibilities as chair of Hydrogen BC, we're looking forward to advancing the hydrogen economy, obviously. But with the Clean BC review that we received here at the end of November this past year, and the recommendations to revisit the hydrogen strategy for the province is at the top of our list, right? Obviously, we've been talking about the chicken and the egg for how many years now. We're trying to advance hydrogen opportunities within the province and to reestablish or to I'll say reaffirm the hydrogen strategy for the province with the provincial government is first and foremost on our task list for this year. So Elemental Clean Fuels recently merged with Caribou Clean Fuels. Many of you recognize me from that. And we're a developer. We're encouraged by the motivation and the opportunities that exist, but we're struggling with mobility, right? So mobility from a perspective of the cost associated to the equipment, the hydrogen supply necessary for smaller scale projects, and where we're seeing the biggest growth opportunity is hydrogen as a feedstock to other clean fuel alternatives, right? Where through the production of hydrogen for methanol initiatives is one initiative or project that we're progressing with, although we haven't forgotten about mobility. So we're working with municipalities in the province as well, and with other enterprises that are on the panel here, DTI, for a municipal fleet conversion, so that it really establishes that hydrogen supply and adoption in a municipal fleet. But I'd be amiss to not include the fact that we need to continue to drive the awareness of hydrogen, right? In our communities is first and foremost something that is a task at hand that we can't take the pedal or can't take the foot off the pedal for. So we look forward to progressing all of these initiatives.
I'll unmute myself. Thanks for kicking us off there, Bob. I do want to return later in the conversation to a few of the points you raised here, particularly on the awareness aspect. I think that's critical because from our perspective at the Canadian Hydrogen Association, we are heavily engaged in advocacy work at the policy level, but there's a whole component of awareness that's built into that, both in terms of ensuring policymakers are up to speed with the economic and environmental benefits of hydrogen and technical aspects, but also that the Canadian public is as well. And that's really important to our efforts at the CHA. And maybe that's a great segue because next up we'll ask Rebecca Goldsack, who of course is from DTI, but also the chair of Hydrogen Alberta. Rebecca, we'd love to learn more about DTI, and we'd also like your thoughts on the following question as well. So Alberta's regulatory and innovation landscape continues to evolve quickly. And even at the end of last year, we saw, seismic shifts in the landscape or the relationship between Alberta and Ottawa. And as we're here in January in 2026, I'm wondering from your view, what milestones or decisions in 2026 in your neck of the woods will matter most for Alberta's hydrogen sector?
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for the introduction. As everyone said, I'm Rebecca Goldsack. DTI is a technology for transportation. So we have developed what we call our Guardian HDS or hydrogen diesel dual fuel. So we have a multi-port injection system that has been applied to motor coaches, transit, long haul applications, as well as we have a project with the Edmonton International Airport for snow maulers. When you talk about diversification, it's so interesting because Alberta has always been known as this epicenter of energy. And, it's amazing to see the progress that we've made federally. When I would go to Ottawa a couple years ago, it was always net zero, net zero, net zero. And it's really changed that framework it's a decarbonization and it's a journey to, get there. When you look at Alberta and its workforce, I mean, obviously here in Alberta, we have a very extensive blue collar workforce, and being able to point and pivot is what Alberta has always been known for. And how do we decarbonize an existing existing transportation, existing pipelines, all these things, and Alberta has really proven that we can do it. And I'm very excited for 2026, where we're really talking about, we've done some pilots, we've demonstrated this technology can and does work, but it's now scaling it so that it has that widespread adoption. And, as Bob and David, you alluded to, education is what, I spend a lot of my time doing, whether it's with, heavy duty technicians or, different entities, engineers and such. So lots of progress has been made, but it's an exciting time for everyone in the hydrogen space.
Thanks for those comments, Rebecca. And your initial point about the narrative kind of shifting from net zero to kind of a decarbonization footing, it's really interesting because we're seeing that continue to evolve, right? And a lot of our discussions that we're having with members and the wider community right now are expanding beyond environmental considerations of hydrogen and really focusing on the economic considerations as well. And we'll be talking about that more, no doubt, as well throughout this call. But thanks for the introductory comments. Next up, we'll go to Ontario, and another special thanks. Micah is a colleague of mine at the Canadian Hydrogen Association and has stepped in on short notice. Our chair of Hydrogen Ontario has unfortunately had a late in the day scheduling conflict. So Micah is joining us, having worked very closely with Hydrogen Ontario over the years, and will be providing perspectives on the state of play in the province. So Micah, thank you so much. And I guess the question we'll start with from the Ontario side is that as we see projects in the province continue to move towards commercialization, what role do you see Ontario playing nationally? Because I think that the kind of narrative we see in the public right now is that, we have Alberta really leading a trail on blue hydrogen development and deployment. We have the Atlantic region really supporting export diversification. How does Ontario fit into this puzzle?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that's a great question. So I think Ontario can leverage its own unique strengths. I spoke this morning at an event of the International Energy Agency working groups on hydrogen and nuclear energy. And I think that's something where Ontario has a clear advantage. Bruce Power did a study on that a couple of years ago, and I hope Ontario will continue leveraging the strengths and developing it. But one of the key projects that is actually becoming operational this year, and it's very exciting, is Atora Power's Niagara Hydrogen Center. And I think this will be a game changer for for Ontario's hydrogen economy. It's also, I think, Canada's first off-grid hydrogen project directly connected to a renewable source. So that's very interesting. And then we'll hopefully also see successful Hydrogen Innovation Fund projects develop and evolve along with MyWay, so Mississauga's bus pilot. So I think we're moving beyond the hen and the egg question at that point. And on a policy front, we're still working on a specific electricity rate for electrolytic hydrogen production and specific supports for SMEs and startups that will hopefully materialize and could also potentially serve as a model for other provinces. So I think Ontario is finding its place and how it can tie into the Canadian hydrogen strategy and help fulfill it.
Excellent. Thanks for setting the stage from Ontario. Next, we'll move to Quebec. Michelle, thanks again for joining us. Obviously, Quebec has not only strong potential, but a strong track record in the clean hydrogen space. So I'm wondering from the Quebec lens, the Quebec point of view, what Hydrogen Quebec and you in particular are looking for from a policy, investment or infrastructure development point of view, and how will these all come together to shape Quebec's progress in the sector in 2026?
Well, thanks, David. Thanks for the invitation. That's a great question. I think from Hydrogen Quebec's perspective, I see three levers to really shape our progress in the next few years. First off, you mentioned it, policy clarity. So the implementation of Quebec's, as you know, we have a hydrogen and bioenergy strategy that has been developed since 2022. So the implementation of that strategy combined with energy planning signals from Hydro-Quebec, I think will determine definitely how quickly projects can secure clean electricity. So that's one very important point. As you know, Quebec's electricity grid is almost entirely renewable thanks to hydroelectricity, but we need energy blocks to build projects, right? So that's definitely one very important lever. Definitely from a policy perspective, prioritizing hydrogen for industrial decarbonization, heavy transport, and clean energy is key to Quebec's positioning. So definitely that's very important. The second lever is investment. As you all know, both provincial and federal clean energy programs will create momentum for large-scale, will create or not create momentum for large-scale projects and industrial decarbonization. So we need to remain active on those fronts and to be meeting with regularly with government representatives to make sure that investment is top of mind. So definitely that second lever is extremely important. And then the third lever is infrastructure. So as you know, major renewable hydrogen projects definitely will shape how hydrogen can develop. And we do have some very good examples in Quebec. We have Enbridge Low Carbon Hydrogen Initiative in Gatineau, which is quite impressive. Then we do have Storm Fisher's methanol project in Varennes. There's a couple of major projects like Hy2Gen in Bécomo, the TESS Canada project in the Mauricie region. So they're all signaling a sector that is scaling towards development and deployment. But for us at Hydrogen Quebec, I think the priority is really aligning these three levers so projects can move from ambition to deployment. So that has been the showstopper for the couple of years, is that a lot of projects are waiting on energy blocks to be released, on investments, tax credits. So we absolutely need to be very active on that front. And just to build on what my colleagues just mentioned, awareness and public acceptance is also emerging as a critical success factor for hydrogen deployment in the province.
Thank you so much for those comments, Michelle. And I particularly enjoyed the quote, "We have to move from ambition to deployment." And I think that's a theme the global hydrogen communities focused on right now, right? We've seen in years gone by a lot of exuberance and a lot of kind of unbound support and ruminating about where the sector can go. But now we have to get practical and we have to get pragmatic about what we can deploy in a medium-term time horizon. What are the accomplishments? What are the low-hanging fruits we can identify? So great. Thank you so much for kicking us off from the Quebec side. And we'll now move to the Atlantic with Derek. So Derek, thanks again for joining us on behalf of the Atlantic Hydrogen Alliance. And my question for you at the start of the discussion here is that 2026, the year ahead, is obviously shaping up to be a defining year for export readiness in Atlantic Canada's hydrogen sector. So I'm wondering if you can get us up to speed here, Derek, on what are the major opportunities and challenges we're seeing on the Atlantic with respect to export diversification.
Okay. And I think I can say more emphatically today than I could have even 10 days ago about how much 2026 is going to be a defining year for export readiness. So let me highlight a couple of big opportunities. First, just last week, the European Commission approved a double auction program that will support the production and export of renewable hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives like ammonia and methanol. And so together, these are referred to as RFNBOs. And these will be produced in Canada and sold to customers in Germany. And this approval will unlock matching funding from the Government of Canada and bring total support for the program to about $600 million. And importantly, the European Commission's approval of that program kicks off a double auction process that will match low-cost RFNBO producers in Canada with buyers in Germany and other EU countries. And then the funding, the $600 million in funding, will help bridge the anticipated gap between the cost of supply and the price that customers are willing to pay. So what all that means for 2026 is that the export project developers that want to be early movers are advancing their projects so that they will be ready to submit bids to sell RFNBOs during the double auction, which should conclude sometime in 2027. So that's one. A second important opportunity is development of smaller domestic hydrogen hub projects. And I think they're important because I don't think Atlantic Canada will be able to build a thriving hydrogen ecosystem over the long term without also using hydrogen locally to help achieve our own regional decarbonization commitment. So as an example, there's work underway in Nova Scotia to develop a small hydrogen corridor for heavy trucking, and projects like this really help support the development of the local supply chains and the workforce expertise as well. So you also mentioned challenges, so I guess I should address some of those. I think there's really kind of four big ones. I mean, the price gap continues to be the biggest challenge, that green hydrogen is still expensive, and the market really needs customers that are willing to pay the price that makes export projects viable. Second, building all the infrastructure is really complex because you have to build from scratch. So unlike electricity or natural gas networks that have existed for 100 years or more, we've got to build the entire hydrogen value chain from production to storage and distribution, all from the ground up, and it's difficult and complex. I think we also have to address skepticism. Here in Atlantic Canada especially, we remember promised LNG projects that didn't materialize, and offshore natural gas projects that really didn't live up to expectations. So we've got to build trust, and we do that through delivery. And Dave, you've touched on that, and I think that's really important. And I think a final challenge, which should be simple but isn't, is that the lack of coordination between the provinces in Atlantic Canada really creates unnecessary barriers. So if you have each province in Atlantic Canada developing their own regulations and codes and standards for hydrogen, we really risk increasing costs and discouraging investments. That regional coordination is also really important.
Thanks for those initial comments, Derek. And I couldn't agree more. And, not only from my view is regional coordination important for the continued advancement of the sector, but so too is national coordination from coast to coast to coast. So with that, I think that's a good transition to our next area of focus, which is on the policy and regulatory environment. And I'm going to pose this question to Rebecca and Michelle first, but all of our panelists are welcome to chime in. And we've been talking about what the next 12 months are going to look like, but I want to take a bit of a look back because the end of 2025 was fairly eventful from a policy and regulatory point of view. And one of the important milestones at the tail end of 2025 was the advancement of the federal budget. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, we'll go with Rebecca and then Michelle, what are your reactions to the federal government's budget and their approach to hydrogen entering into the year? And how will the budget and the wider tone and tenor out of Ottawa either help or hinder hydrogen deployment in your region, but also across the country? And Rebecca, I'll throw that that kind of giant question your way first.
Yeah, I think, to bring it back to a bit more context too, I think the announcement of the CSA regulation also plays a huge part into the adoption and us finally learning how do we actually use these vehicles in fleets. So then when you take it to our federal budget, I think it's very exciting to know that there is now, line items that talk about how do we get to where we need to go. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, with hydrogen leak detection, facilities, all those things. Pipelines is a huge one. Here in Alberta, we did have a bill that came through. So we're hoping that, making sure that these are top of mind for politicians and bureaucrats are definitely going to be top of mind. But, some wins we had last year, in the provincial level, we had one of our fleets that had a concern because he was going to be able to haul less fuel. He's a fuel hauler. And so he ended up sitting across from the table, the person that does the regulations for Alberta transportation. And he was able to get a quick exemption just from a simple conversation. And it's that collaborative effort that I think that we're going to see within the industry. Things like the CHA going to Ottawa and working with these different entities to make sure that their questions are answered and that it's not just, someone writing a policy and, saying, here, do with it. It's really about the stakeholder engagement. And I think that our government now more than ever has, definitely risen to the challenge of wanting to work together towards that common goal to make sure that we're not developing policies that aren't attainable and aren't going to work. So things like them, redacting, we're not going to meet that 2030 mandate that we had put in place. So let's figure out now what the working steps are to get towards that goal.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And I agree that there is kind of an air of engagement and consultation coming out of Ottawa. Although I do have a small gripe that their consultations do run over the holiday season every year, it seems, but it's neither here nor there, I suppose. Michelle, what are your thoughts on the federal budget and where we're at in terms of policy coming out of Ottawa?
Well, I totally agree with what Rebecca said, but from Hydrogen Quebec's perspective, I would say that I feel that there's a bit of a mixed signal emerging from the federal budget. On one hand, we agreed, obviously, that continued support for clean electricity, industrial decarbonization, strategic infrastructure is essential. Obviously, hydrogen projects in Quebec depend on exactly those foundations, but any measures that it can accelerate grid capacity, streamline permitting, strengthen investment, tax credits will obviously directly help our ecosystem. But on the other hand, the pace and the clarity of those federal programs, I do think they remain critical at this point. Hydrogen projects are, as you know, capital intensive and time sensitive. So delays and tax credits and implementing tax credits or uncertainty about eligibility can slow momentum. Definitely, we've seen that, especially in regions like Quebec, where demand and projects pipelines are already very strong. So under the current federal framework, there's several green hydrogen projects that may not qualify for full clean hydrogen tax credits, as you know, because of how the carbon intensity calculation is structured. So for us, it's a real competitive issue right now. So Quebec has some of the cleanest electricity in the world, and our projects should be able to access the full incentive when they deliver the low carbon hydrogen that's being delivered. So while the tax credit is a positive signal, definitely, we think that the calculation rules, and I think we've had those discussions in the past, but they need to reflect regional realities much more than they do right now. So, so overall, I would say, to answer the question, the budget definitely helps by reinforcing the long-term direction, but we need timely, predictable execution of this budget to ensure that our major projects, hydrogen projects in Quebec, can scale at the speed that's required for industrial decarbonization. So that's a bit of my thought on the federal budget.
Appreciate that, and maybe just for the audience's greater context from this Canadian Hydrogen Association's perspective, when we go to Ottawa together with our partners on the call and throughout our membership roster, one of the key messages we try to bring is that we support the government's initiatives pertaining to critical minerals, decarbonization, export diversification, defense investment, and that hydrogen has a role to play in all of these priority areas of focus that Ottawa's identified. And one of the things that we're looking at is, let's optimize the ITCs to accelerate projects moving forward, because they're really integral to all of the other things Ottawa wants to accomplish, right? So hydrogen is really embedded in all of these different buckets, right? So and maybe that's my cue to segue to the next question, which I'll pose to Bob and Micah, which is we've heard some of the both opportunities and maybe some of the challenges emanating out of Ottawa from a policy and budget perspective. And looking broadly, I'm wondering if each of you could give one recommendation to policymakers in Ottawa or in your respective provinces as we kick off 2026. What would it be and why? And Bob, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Clarity, right? The opportunity.
I almost spat my coffee out there, Bob. Thanks.
Yeah, let's face it. I think what the governments, both provincially and federally, need to recognize is that there are industry experts out there willing to assist, right? So, Michelle suggested that it's policies that are being driven or prepared and delivered by our politicians or our governments, and we're not seeing the clarity and the execution on that clarity, right? So let's face it, hydrogen, Derek mentioned it, our natural gas systems, our power systems, they're decades, hundreds of years old. They've taken material investment, but they were investments that they had certainty of because there was clarity in public policies, right? So we need to continuing our lobbying efforts through the CHA and other associations in the industries, right? The other clean fuel associations are a part of it to drive the message home that the clarity that we're seeking will benefit the nation in not just investment, but jobs and value, and to drive us towards that emission reduction that we're all trying to achieve.
Can I just pull on that thread just a little bit and ask? I completely agree that there's a need for greater clarity on the policy level as it pertains to hydrogen growth and development. But I'm wondering from your view, Bob, or if there's other folks on the panel that want to chime in, is hydrogen unique in that respect? Do we stand alone? Like, are other sectors in the clean energy ecosystem or other sectors of the economy, are they all saying the same thing, that they need clarity as well? Or is this kind of a unique beast that we're trying to wrestle with?
I don't believe so. I don't think we're unique. Like, look at the clean fuels regulation that public consultation or input was received last Friday, right? So I think it's broad. I think we need to assist through the associations and the industry experts that are members of those associations, right? So I don't think it's just specific to what we're discussing here today in the hydrogen adoption, because as you alluded to, the hydrogen is a key component to many of the clean fuels and can be a power opportunity as well, right? So if we look across the board, it's, do we need to collaborate with the other associations in our efforts to drive the message home to seek that clarity at the government levels, right?
Perfect. Thanks for that, Bob. Micah, over to you. What is your one policy ask if you could make it towards either provincial or federal officials?
One policy ask, David. I have a list. Well, maybe I'll start with the provincial one, since Michelle touched on the hydrogen investment tax credit, which is obviously key and can potentially be the most powerful tool in Canada's policy toolbox. So here in Ontario, but hearing from Derek, I assume the same holds true probably in Atlantic Canada and elsewhere, a dedicated electricity rate for electrolytic hydrogen production. That would be helpful because it provides that clarity Bob just talked about, stability, certainty, because you need that over 20 years of a project lifespan. And it has the potential to also drive the costs down, partially by providing that certainty, but partially also by locking in a favorable rate. And then maybe to add or to reinforce both your point, David, and Bob's point, I think national leadership, the demonstration of national leadership, whether that's the industrial carbon pricing scheme or making hydrogen a viable part of Canada's competitiveness strategy, and translate this into concrete actions, because on paper that's all nice, but what does it actually mean and how does it break down and leverage each province's strength?
Thanks for that, Micah. And apologies for asking that question. I'm just realizing, of course, the board of Hydrogen Ontario has very detailed policy requests and recommendations, and asking for just one might have been perhaps a bit unfair. But thanks for that. And I want to go back now to talk a bit about international markets. And Derek, you touched on this in your introductory remarks a little bit, and I want to kind of go down that rabbit hole in some of the time we have remaining on the call here. And maybe if I could ask this to both Derek and Rebecca, how can Canada best position itself from an international perspective this year as we see global demand for clean hydrogen and ammonia accelerate? And maybe Derek, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Rebecca.
Okay. If you don't mind, David, I'll maybe answer the question from an Atlantic Canada perspective. But I think if we're talking about international markets in Europe, it's highly likely that that hydrogen is going to come from Atlantic Canada. So I think to position Atlantic Canada competitively, we really have to leverage the competitive advantages we have. And there are several. For one, our region's ice-free deep-water ports give Atlantic Canada direct access to European markets. And Canada's a really big country, but the reality is Atlantic Canada is geographically closer to Hamburg, Germany, than it is to Calgary. So that European market is actually relatively close from an Atlantic Canada standpoint. Second big advantage we have is we have a lot of wind, both onshore wind and offshore wind, which is getting a lot of focus here and government priority. It is our most abundant natural resource, and we tend to not think of the wind as a natural resource, but it is. The challenge is we can't put wind on a ship and export it to Europe, but we can turn wind into green hydrogen and derivatives and then export that. So that's a big advantage. And third, Atlantic Canada really knows energy. We have decades of experience in offshore oil and natural gas and hydropower and refining. We're doing a lot of work now in onshore wind. So we have a lot of the expertise and the infrastructure that can translate perfectly to the hydrogen sector. So that'd be the third. And for the fourth, I'm going to quote Prime Minister Mark Carney, because I was preparing for this webinar last night when I was watching his speech at the World Economic Forum. And one of the things he said really struck with me. He said, "We are a stable, reliable partner in a world that is anything but." And that may be our most important competitive advantage, that Canada is and will continue to be a reliable, stable, trustworthy energy trading partner with our allies in Europe and elsewhere. And today, that might be more important than anything else.
I have a feeling a number of the audience members are giving you a standing ovation for those remarks right now, Derek. It was great. And couldn't agree more. And I think that's another great segue to Rebecca, right? We have Alberta, which is historically Canada's energy superpower, great oil and gas community in that province. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do we integrate hydrogen into Canada's energy export portfolio? Over to you. Simple question.
Not simple, yeah, so simple. I think that is really the key to diversification. We have great potential of hydrogen here in Canada, but it's really those export markets. So, those conversations that have been had with Japan, and I mean the great work that Mark Carney has been doing, in other regions. So it's the collaboration with, as Derek was just talking about, Germany, they've got a lot of really great work that they've done on hydrogen. So it's that co-collaboration. And then once again, I talk about Alberta's workforce, right? We have the knowledge and ability, we've got the University of Alberta, University of Calgary that have done amazing work on hydrogen, how to use that molecule, pipeline and all those other things. So that's a key thing in getting that to Tidewater. Different provinces working together to, develop pipelines, and, ammonia does become top of mind when we have those conversations as well, because that seems to be, but it's really that collaboration with other markets. And, once again, we go back to that conversation of we need to do this quickly. We don't have a large runway because, we need to get these projects going so that they can use our energy, because otherwise we're just going to lose out.
That's a great point. And, it got me thinking, because when we're talking about Canada's role in the global hydrogen sector, obviously we're looking at exports of hydrogen and its derivatives, but we also have a really strong research and development community here at home, right? So when we're talking about exports of hydrogen, we should also be including patents and technology as part of these discussions, right? Canada has a long history in the sector dating back to 1905. And in that time, we've developed a number of patents and technologies that are kind of integral to hydrogen production. So, so thank you for your remarks on that. It's got the hamster wheel turning. So just moving onwards from markets now to tech. I'm hoping that Micah, Bob, and Michelle can kind of flag some emerging technologies that are on your radar. Emerging technologies or applications that the sector should really watch closely in 2026. And maybe Micah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think Canada, we have a number of hydrogen pyrolysis companies. And I think specifically in Ontario, I think that is going to be very interesting because we don't have the framework for CCUS yet. And even if we have it, the capacities might be limited. So that could be really interesting. And then also any emerging pathways for more cost competitive SAF or e-fuel production. Again, nuclear plus hydrogen, or remote power and flexible refueling applications, such as Hone's hydrogen generator system. I think that is really interesting, and I hope we'll have the first film project powered with a hydrogen generator made in Ontario here in Toronto soon.
Thanks for that, Micah. We've heard from Ontario, now over to BC. Bob, what are you looking forward to from a technology or applications point of view?
Yeah, we're technology agnostic, but I think in any technology deployment or development, it's about how do you get that idea or that tech from idea to demonstration and then to commercialization. So I would agree with Micah. Methane pyrolysis is the first and foremost that comes to mind when I look at the developing technologies. But most of them have not yet got to that commercial standpoint. I think they're very close and on a path to success, but we need to have that support mechanism, whether it's through policy or clarity of policy, that would enable that, right? And if you look at it from the application standpoint, where when we started the hydrogen initiative, it was all focused towards, or primarily focused towards, transportation. And we've seen some struggles along the way with respect to that. But being able to shift to the point where, it's industrial carbonization, like our Kamloops projects with Tecumloops and Kruger, that you've got a carbon abatement and emission reduction with an industrial host that is looking for those emission benefits, right? And the certainty that that's creating in that value proposition. When you create hydrogen for a SAF or a renewable diesel project, you have or could engineer a surplus of hydrogen that could complement the transportation sector that we've always had a focus on, right? So I think, where I see the opportunities for the year ahead is how do you support the technologies that are evolving and are on the cusp of that commercial standpoint, but how you can incorporate hydrogen into so many benefits of other e-fuel products or industrial displacement or carbon abatement initiatives that support our drive towards transportation and creating that hub and spoke model, right?
Sounds pretty straightforward, Bob.
Yeah, right.
But thanks for those remarks. And over to Quebec. Michel, what are you looking at in Quebec in terms of emerging technologies or applications in the year ahead?
Yeah, well, I totally agree with what Bob and Mikey just mentioned. So definitely agree on that front. I would add high temperature electrolysis, which can, as you know, dramatically improve efficiency when it's paired with industrial heat. So that's definitely one of the area we're looking at. The rise of hydrogen hubs as well. So we see that those hubs where production, storage, and use are co-located, we see that it's really efficient, obviously, to reduce costs and accelerate deployment. So definitely hydrogen hubs are very important as well. Then I would say also new applications in heavy transport and off-grid mobility, where fuel cell systems are becoming more compact and commercially viable. So that's another focus. And then finally, and I think Mikey alluded to that, but all synthetic fuels, sorry. So e-methanol, e-kerosene, and then renewable ammonia are moving from pilot to commercial scale. So that's opening up to a lot of export pathways. So I would say together, those technologies are clear signal that the sector is shifting from experimentation to real world scaling. So, so being very positive on the technology front, I think there's a lot more to come. So in a nutshell, that's our areas of focus.
That's perfect. And I think, between those responses, I think to me, it's fairly clear that there's a real diversity in technologies and applications at play here, both emerging and already in full swing. And maybe just looking at some of the questions in the chat, I'll pose this to the group. We'll try to get 2 or 3 questions in before we have to wrap up. But there is emerging and quite serious focus right now in Canada on white hydrogen. And I'm just wondering if any member of the panel wants to provide their view on the potential path forward for that particular aspect of the hydrogen sector and where you see it going over the next 12 months. Any initial comments or thoughts on that one? Derek?
I'm happy to jump in because it probably is the question I've been asked the most over the last couple of months. Well, the question is, what is natural or white hydrogen and why are we exploring for it now? So for those who don't know, like white hydrogen or natural hydrogen is hydrogen that exists underground or is produced through chemical processes underground. And it's very speculative at this point. I think there's only one commercial scale white hydrogen project operating globally, and it's in Mali, I believe. Although there's a second project in France, I think that's about to get underway. And interestingly, both of those projects are extracting natural hydrogen that was discovered by accident. So kind of the speculation is natural hydrogen kind of like methane or natural gas, that when we first discovered it 100 years ago is when we were drilling for oil, and natural gas was this pesky byproduct that we had to flare off because we didn't know what to do with it. And then we started realizing, oh, wait a minute, this is an energy source that we could really benefit from. So the speculation is maybe we haven't found much natural hydrogen because we've never looked for it. And once we actually start looking with purpose and figuring out, like from a geoscience standpoint, what's the right kind of geology and look at the right exploration methods, maybe there's a lot of it there. We don't know, and we won't really know until we explore. So here in Nova Scotia, there are now 3 companies that are exploring for natural hydrogen. I'd say for 2 reasons. One, we seem to have the right kind of geology where you might expect to find it. But as importantly, the Nova Scotia government's kind of said, we don't have any regulations for this. It's not a mineral. It's not a petroleum product. It's a gas, but it doesn't really kind of fit within any of our regulatory frameworks. So go look for it. If you find some, come back to us, and then we'll figure out then sort of what the right regulatory framework needs to be. So I think that approach is probably what we need. And if more provinces in Canada kind of took that approach, there might be a lot more companies doing a lot more exploration.
That's perfect. Thank you for that, Derek. And I have to fulfill my moderator duties here, so I'm just looking at the clock. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to squeak one more question in. If we just have a quick answer from one person on this one, so don't all rush to the mic. But the question is, what should we be doing as collective industry associations to promote hydrogen education and a skills development strategy? Again, huge question, but let's try to focus the response just given the time. Any thoughts on that? Micah, I might ask you, or Bob, are you going to chime in?
That's a hard question. Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I know that we got to drive towards it, right? Because I think that is something that is a hurdle for our industry. And yeah, I don't have any off the top of my head solutions for that one.
Maybe I'll just note, just in the interest of time, this is an area of focus for the Canadian Hydrogen Association. And we're going to be announcing in the coming weeks, we're just etching out the details of a new partnership with SWIST, the Society of Canadian Women in Science and Technology. And, this is one effort that the CHA is engaging in to ensure that we take a broad approach to skills development and training, and ensure that we create opportunities in the hydrogen sector for Canadians from coast to coast to be involved in the economic development opportunities hydrogen brings. So this is one area of growth, or one area of focus the association is going to be working on. We're going to be announcing a few other education and skills development initiatives soon, but please stay tuned. Now, to wrap up, we have 3 minutes left, and I apologize for being a lousy moderator on the timekeeping here, but I'll ask our panelists for very quick closing comments. And the closing question is, what does success look like for Canada's hydrogen sector at the end of 2026? And how will we know we're on the right path to get there? And maybe we'll close by going east to west. So we'll start with Derek.
Great, thank you. So from an Atlantic Canada standpoint, I think success will be defined by a transition from ambition and planning to commitments and FIDs, and hopefully actually project execution. And I think we'll know we're on the right trajectory when we see shovels getting in the ground to have, now whether that's figuratively or literally, that's going to help address a lot of the skepticism. I think we'll also be on the right trajectory when we're moving fast and slow, meaning, we're patient and confident enough to play the long game, because like the scale up of wind and the solar industry, like that's taken a decade or two. So this development of the hydrogen sector is not going to happen overnight, but we also need to act with urgency today. And so hopefully we'll start seeing that in 2026.
Thank you for that. Michelle.
I would say that success will come from scaling real projects. I think we've mentioned that broadly during the webinar, securing long-term offtakes, ensuring that tax credits and permitting systems are predictable. I think if Canada aligns its policy, infrastructure, investment, altogether, hydrogen will become not just an energy option, but a strategic pillar to our industrial strategy and our climate ambitions as well.
Perfect. And over to you, Micah.
Yeah. So I think we know we're on the right trajectory when we start overcoming the hen and the egg question. And I think here in Ontario, we're moving towards that. So with the first large-scale production project in Niagara and deployment of HIF projects that represent potential offtake, and then I would wish for the dedicated electricity rate to be done and dusted by end of the year and rolled out, and at least an intent to provide further funding dedicated towards innovative startups and SMEs. And the other big point, refueling infrastructure. So maybe within the CIB or the CGF, the Canada Growth Fund mandate, or in another way, but these would be important signals.
Thanks for that. And over to Alberta, Rebecca.
Reiterating everyone's other comments, taking these from large, pilots to large scale. Obviously there's exciting news with hopefully the roadmap for Alberta being unveiled with kind of the next strategic steps. So that'll be a huge shift. Talking about how do we actually execute on, projects that have already started.
Thanks for that. And Bob, I'm hoping you can close us out from BC.
Yeah, appreciate that. The one thing that we haven't talked about is access to capital. And so many of the projects that have been discussed here today, or the initiatives of the associations or the panelists, is that access to capital. And that, for me, is success. And that's something that we have transitioned to the point where we have development capital to deploy. And we've seen a reduction, I'll say, of the enthusiasts, that some of the others have gone off to chase new shiny objects. And we're in it to win it. We're here to stay. And if there's an opportunity or a project or an investment that you need support for, reach out to me, because we're here to assist as well. And like Derek said, we got to get the shovels in the dirt and get past the pilot projects and into those commercial scale developments.
That's perfect. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So again, I want to thank our panelists for providing their expertise and insights over the past hour. And Bob, that was a great dovetailing into one of my closing remarks here. We didn't get a chance to talk a lot about a lot of topics. Hydrogen, of course, is a very multifaceted field. But I do want to flag that the Canadian Hydrogen Association is running a series of webinars and other initiatives over the year ahead. So I do encourage members and potential members to review our 2026 membership package, which is available on our website, canadah2.ca. And if you are interested in supporting and being involved in a future webinar or other form of discussion on these topics, please do feel free to reach out to the CHA. And with that, thanks again to our panelists. Thanks again to the 90-some folks that were on the call today. And really appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, David.